College football apocalypse. Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football, talking up the game we love, but not necessarily talking about the game on the field these days. We got Tony Siracusa on the line from Last Word on College Football. Tony, always love talking with you. Thanks, typically Mark. Under better conditions, talking about the play on the field, but this has been the state of our nation, not just college football, but it has spilled into our college football arena here in the last 5 to 6 months. How you doing today?
Yeah, I decided just to give up on sleep because every time we think we know something, that changes in the next hour or so. And so, I've told our staff at Last Word on College Football, the word you need to learn to live with is context. Don't repeat some breathless thing that a reporter from another place tweeted or posted. Always look at the context. There's a very complex issue. And if you think you can get it just by reading some headlines, you're sorely mistaken. So there's a lot of depth and complexities to this. And so we're trying to stay on top of all of it. And like I said, the end result is you just give up on sleep.
In that same vein, Tony, yes, we gave up on sleep a long time ago. But in regard to this situation, in that same vein, I clicked on an article from a major site just a few hours ago, but I quickly found out that it was from July 29th, even though it was prominent on the site. And things are changing way too fast to be reading something from 2 weeks ago.
Yeah, that's true.
And where we stand right now is that the Big Ten, as of just a few minutes ago, had yet to officially cancel the season, although that had been reported by a number of news sources that the Big Ten was canceling the season. Then there was a retraction of sorts out there to say, hey, wait a minute, it's not become official. That's the last I've heard.
Right. As you and I sit here right now, the vote is going to be at 6 p.m. Eastern time on Monday. So, that it seems imminent, but it's strange. We have reporters that have been able to confirm that Nebraska and Ohio State were on the practice field today, working out as if it was any other day. So even in the midst of certainty, there seems to be a lack of certainty.
Yeah, and my sources tell me that Nebraska and Iowa would be the two schools that are voting to play versus the other 12 in the Big Ten who are voting not to play.
Right. And the thing is, look, it's I get it. There is a lot at stake here. You and I love college football, and we love the purity of college football, but we have to admit it's a business, and there are a lot of money issues. The NCAA has put off all of the insurance premium cost onto the individual schools to cover COVID-related issues. That is massive. It's going to cost hundreds of thousands of dollars to do the testing protocols mandated to play. That is a lot. So a lot of schools have got to look at how much are we going to lose in the TV contract if we don't play versus how much is it going to cost us on the other end if we do try to play, and then what happens. What gets me are people like the Big Ten commissioner, Kevin Warren, who says, well, it's about player safety. And at the same time, he's proposing that they play in the spring. So in other words, you're proposing that these players play 2 full seasons in a 9-month period with just a handful of weeks off in between. And that's okay for player safety. Like, just come out and say, look, we're not sure we can afford to pull this off. And we want to be able to isolate everybody and do what's best for the greater school and the greater program. And that's the decision. To keep saying it's player safety when you're proposing they go out and play 24 games in 9 months that's a little silly.
Tony, before we get to the current situation, since you went down the road of the spring season, that's been something that's been talked about for several months now. And I have yet to put pen to paper in regards to trying to work out the logistics, but just in my mind, because I'm going to shoot a video on this because I don't think it's feasible. Is it possible? Yes. I don't believe it's feasible to put those athletes through 2 even reduced seasons, let's say of 10 games covering 12 weeks, 2 bye weeks in 1 calendar year or less than a calendar year. Let's say they start playing the first week of February. That's week 1 of the new college football season, the first week of February. If it covers 12 weeks and 10 games, that's 3 full months. They're going to be February, March, and April. That's going to take us to the end of April.
Yep.
There's going to be, let's say, no bowl games, but a college football playoff and maybe a few other bowl games they want to get in the Rose Bowl or whatever else. They're going to be playing those over the first 2 weeks of May. Right. So the college football season wouldn't conclude until mid-May.
Right.
And then
then
they have
camp
to turn
starting in
around
mid
at
to
the
late
end of
July.
July
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
start playing again.
Yeah.
And this doesn't take into account the front half of this, which would be the preparation of the coaches and the players leading into the first week of the season.
Right.
So if you're playing the first week of the season, you need 5 to 6 weeks. We're taking them into camp around Christmas time to get ready
Right.
for a college football season.
Yeah, I came to the same conclusion. I put a column out about a couple of weeks ago saying, you can't be seriously considering playing in the spring. You're going to take the top 10 players on your roster and cross them off your roster because no one wants to play in games against an 0-5 team when they're on top of the NFL Combine in February or pro days in March or the draft in April. There's no way. And then the logistics, as you point out as well. And let's throw this in. What do you do with the early graduates who graduate in December? Do you have them take some Mickey Mouse classes on the school's dime just to stay eligible for the spring season? And what about the early enrollees who haven't even had a camp? Are you ready to put them out on the field in a spring season when, 6 months ago they were in high school, or 3 months ago they were in high school? It's just, there are too many logistics. I talked to Kevin Sumlin about this back in May, and he pointed out a lot of what you said and the things I just mentioned as well. The coaches don't want it. The schools may talk about it. The coaches don't want it.
Yeah, there's 250 some players that get drafted in the NFL draft. If you do the math, it's usually 256 is that number, then depending on additional picks. But there's probably 400 to 500 players that have a reasonable chance of getting drafted, signing free agent contracts if they don't get drafted. So we're talking about taking away 400 to 500 players that certainly would bypass their senior or junior season in the collegiate ranks to prepare themselves for an NFL draft.
Right. It doesn't work. It doesn't work.
Tony Syracuse, the last word on college football. When we need some wisdom and insight into a situation, we go to Tony. So we bring him in because this is just a mess when it comes to college football for 2020 or 2021. And then how do you print the national championship rings? Do you have like 2021A and 2021B? Or
I hadn't even thought about that.
The first season, the second season.
Yeah, I hadn't even thought about that.
I don't think that's much consideration given to that right now,
and
rightfully so. Based on the current situation, Tony, how do you think this breaks down? Because to me, it's a tug of war between, and I don't want to simplify it too much, but health and safety of the players versus the money loss / recouping the money, the financial considerations. I don't want to politicize anything here, so I don't want to draw any conclusions on which way they could be tugged one way or the other. So how do you think that's playing out? It's obviously going the way, at least on the surface, of health and safety, although the MAC and others are obviously canceling the season because there's no way that they can make money without non-conference games at that level.
Right. And they can't afford the testing protocols and the insurance and things like that. It makes sense for them. What I think we're seeing is, last week, some reporters breathlessly talked about, we're seeing the Power 5 schools pull away from the NCAA. Context, man. This is the breakup of the Power 5. We're having a family divorce here, because as you and I sit here, the SEC and the ACC are leaning towards playing. And the Big 12 is TBD, and the Pac-12 and the Big 10 are going to cancel. And so I think we're looking at a family divorce of the Power 5. And you got to know that the SEC and Greg Sankey are driving the boat on this. Look, they have ESPN stands to lose. They reported about $75 to $80 million without this and without college football. Their business partners are the SEC and the ACC. They own part of those networks. If there's a way to play some games, have the college football viewing audience, it's going to be, look, you're a great media guy. If you don't have 10 games spread out across your satellite dish at one time, but there's only a handful of games being played, that audience is going to be massive. I'm not saying you put the players at risk to do that. I have never said one way or the other whether they should or should not play. Our reporting is, here's what is, and here's what it means, and here's the context for that. If I were a first-round draft pick, I'd probably opt out. Say, I'm not going to do it. What do I need it for? If I'm Tony Syracuse, who's lucky to get an undrafted free agent offer at the end of the NFL draft, I'm probably playing, because I'm willing to take that risk. So it's the, and you're also going to see the distancing of the haves and the have-nots. That gap is going to grow even greater because, a MAC school used to be able to play a Big 10 school or a Big 12 school, and that game paid for the existence of the athletic department for the entire year. Those are gone. And you're now, you've shut off the season, so that saves you some money, but there's no revenue coming in. And so that becomes a problem. So I think you're going to see the gap grow in the haves and have-nots.
And like you, Tony, I'm hesitant to make declarations when it comes to the health and safety standards and also the health and safety metrics and statistics that we see, because I want to take this extremely seriously, of course, because it's affecting people's health. And even if there's a minimal risk, it's a minimal risk. So it would be easy for us as college football fans to say, go play, and there's that much of a chance that you're going to get it, and there's even a lot less that you're going to seriously be impacted by it. But and I think that the statistics show that for that age range, but still it is a risk. And still the thing that bothers me is not knowing the large or the long range impact on the health.
And that's 2 to 3 years away. Science doesn't move in 4-month increments. We won't know the long-term lung or heart impact on this for years. It takes science that long to be affirmative in any direction. And I think we also need to get out of the mindset of it's about the players. Hey, Nick Saban is 68 years old. So is Mac Brown. Herm Edwards is 65 or 66. You got coaching staff and assistants and team staff that are at risk as well. And I think that needs to be part of the conversation. That having been said, it is a business, and business decisions will be made.
Tony Siracusa, Last Word on College Football. We encourage you to head on over to Last Word on College Football. Check out Tony's work and the rest of the staff there that have been so supportive of Mark Rogers TV throughout the years and supplied us with a lot of great contribution, with Tony in particular.
Thanks.
So Larry Scott, though. Larry Scott to the rescue. Larry Scott has a plan, right, Tony?
So, yeah, look, Larry Scott says he's got this plan. He can get $1 billion to the schools who lose out from the TV contract. Now, who gets how much money? It's not going to be evenly distributed. It's going to be based on how much you lost in game day revenue. It's going to be based on things like how much of the TV contract you're getting, things like that. So it'll be divided. Here's the problem. The Pac-12 conference does not have the $1 billion to give out. They don't have it. Last summer, and we have very in-depth reporting on this last year. Last summer, the Pac-12 needed assets, cash, money. So they actually went on a tour of private equity and investment firms around the country, literally asking for $750 million. Now, look, you're a smart guy. You know finances. You know business. I know them as well. If Larry Scott walks into the Tony Siracusa, Mark Rogers private equity firm and says, we need $750 million, and here's how cool we are, and here's all the things we do, what is it that we want from Larry Scott? We want something more than just money back. We want seats at the table. We want seats on the board of directors. And usually these firms will take 2, maybe even 3 of the companies that they invest that heavily in. It's Pac-12 conference. There's no board of directors. There's the school presidents and chancellors that Scott refers to as his CEO group. But if you're the Mark and Tony private equity firm, you don't give $750 million to Larry Scott and then let him go do whatever with it, because he's the reason they need the $750 million to begin with. So you don't let him just go do whatever and say, sure, here you go. And yeah, we'll get our 2% return or whatever. That's insanity. So he got nothing out of all the firms he went to. And our intel says he went to about 8 and he got nothing. And so where are they going to get the money from? Well, it turns out they have hired a group, an organization called the RAIN Group, which is a financial advisory company that will help guide him on who will loan him the money, banks, whatever the case may be. Question is, what assets are you using to you for collateral, right? You don't have that contract with ESPN, and you're pretty sorry about that right now, because the ESPN networks, the ACC and the SEC, are probably going to be playing football. What do you have? You've got this great property in San Francisco, which you've completely devalued because you've had to take budget cuts and pay cuts and everything else. You don't have a lot going for you to get that money. But let's say they could. All right. Let's just assume Larry Scott's able to get that money. The terms would be 3 years, 3-year loans to the school. In other words, when I say bailout, he's not really giving it to them. He's loaning it to them at about 3.5% interest. I mean, all of a sudden, if you think about it, all of a sudden, Larry Scott is like Paul Castellano running the Gambino crime family, loaning out money to 3.5% VIG. I mean, what are we doing here? It's absurd. And think about this. Take the next step, because my family's already sick of me using the word context. They're going to ban it from my vocabulary any day now. If you have just lost the college football season, and as a university, you are already going to take a hit because there are fewer students on campus, you have less revenue from housing, on-campus activities, wherever else you draw revenue from. You've lost the TV contract for at least a year. How are you going to pay this loan back in 3 years? With what? If you're a university, first of all, there's so many universities already in dire financial trouble. Now you add COVID and what that does to them. Now you add the lack of football/TV/sports revenue. How do you pay that back in 3 years? And if Larry Scott is Paul Castellano, what happens if you don't? Is he going to foreclose on Pauley Pavilion? The entire concept it makes no sense. That's not to say they won't do it. That's not to say Larry Scott won't do it, because he's done lots of things that don't make sense. But if there is no college football this season, I think we also wind up seeing the end of the Pac-12 network. It already is so grossly limited in scope and size and viewership. And now you're going to be reduced to paying, to collecting $45 for every 30-second spot from an advertiser. And the only ones willing to still, advertise on the greatest Cal versus Arizona football games that you're going to show in endless reels for the next 12 months. There's only so many 2008 Pac-12 track and field championships that you can show and have anybody care. So I think that along the steps of all of this, I think you wind up possibly seeing the end of the Pac-12 network financially.
$750 million that would have to be paid back in 3 years at 3%.
Right. Well, the $750 million is what he went asking for out of the equity firms, and he got none of that. The loan that the Pac-12 would take would be $1 billion, and that would be distributed across the board among the 12 schools. So each school gets, $200 million or whatever, $100 million, whatever their particular needs are, at 3.5% over 3 years. Yeah. Well,
based on what I know of
the Pac-12 crime syndicate.
Well, what I know of collegiate athletics revenues in football and basketball, it just doesn't add up to be able to come anywhere close to paying that kind of money back.
Especially when you're already operating out of a hole. Look, UCLA is already running the athletic department. Martin Jarmond inherited an $18 million deficit. They're already in a hole. So yeah, let's pile on some more to it. Where does this make sense? It doesn't, except in the Larry Scott world.
The Larry Scott world. Pac-12 fans will know exactly what Tony's talking about. You catch Tony on Last Word on College Football, and his segments here talking to UCLA, the Pac-12, and college football overall. So last week, Pac-12 players showed a united front. They had been in communication for several weeks. Then they brought a list of demands concerning both health and safety for COVID and then also race relations to the forefront. I posted a video just a few days ago addressing at least my thoughts, in which I clearly stated, did you check out that gem for 30 minutes? I got a little long-winded.
That's okay.
At least with the disclaimer that I didn't know the details and some of the, there's that word context of some of it, but it was my initial response to what was being stated. What is your general response and thoughts concerning the player demands?
I think there are a few things. I think, just like I've always said, we can't take the testing results at the different colleges the same, because different players came from different things and the schools onboarded them differently. I think we cannot take the player demands all the same. The Pac-12 got the ball rolling, if you will, and then other schools started doing it. Other players at other teams started doing it as well. Now there's one, I think, for every conference, every major conference. Here are my thoughts on what the Pac-12 did. There were a lot of things that made me very curious. I wrote about this last weekend. The Pac-12 came out, when they came out with their schedule a few days ahead of the rest of the conferences, they also talked about the testing protocols and how often they were going to be tested, and the rapid testing and the contact tracing, and how all of that was going to work. Part of the list of demands of the Pac-12 players was exactly that. We want to know about this on the testing, and who does the testing, and how quickly do we get results, and all of those things. Well, asked and answered already, about 72 hours prior. And then one of the things they asked for, well, these two things to me that seem connected. We want to make sure that the players and that the athletes in the non-revenue sports are protected. There are brothers and sisters, and we want 50% revenue sharing. Okay, now you jumped the shark. Now you've gone off into nutty land. You cannot ask for 50% revenue sharing and protect the non-revenue sports in the same breath, because the minute you get 50% revenue sharing, guess where it's coming from? Not having to foot the bill for women's tennis and men's lacrosse and women's soccer and whatever else. The two are inherently opposite in terms of their functionality. Secondly, you have zero chance of getting 50% revenue sharing. Zero. If there were less than zero, then that's where I would go. Thirdly, if you're paying attention, the school finances across all schools are already in a state of chaos, right? I've seen reports. There's a company that does the stress test for banks, financial institutions, and they did one for colleges based on 4 or 5 different categories. There are more than 500 colleges in this country right now that prior to the pandemic were already having financial problems. So now we got financial chaos in the universities and college systems that people are not paying enough attention to. But back to the players. Let me get this straight. We're about to take the biggest revenue dive in the last 20 years of our school, regardless of which school it is. And you want 50% of going backwards. Really? It's crazy. And I think what happens is you look at what the other conferences did, the players from the other conferences, and they stuck to the testing and the transparency and the protocols and things of that nature. And for the most part, stayed away from the revenue sharing issue. I know that a players committee met with Larry Scott last Thursday. Now, revenue sharing got pushed to the back of the table. That's like, it became, we'll discuss that down the road because there's nothing we can do about it right now. Let's talk about the transparency and the testing and so on. The players came away not liking Larry Scott's tone so much, but I think part of it was because he was telling them, we already gave you this. Why are you asking for it here? And causing this kerfluffle, to use one of my grandmother's old words. And so they didn't like his tone, but the reality is they opened up conversation on the transparency of how to go through the safety precautions and skip the revenue part for now. And when I say skip it, I mean they're never going to get to it.
Yeah, I understand, without looking at the big picture and looking at the other side, I understand the player's point that they put in the blood, sweat, and tears, and everybody else is getting rich, and we're creating all this revenue. Why don't we get a share of it? But I think they also need to consider that they are paid tuition, and that's a valuable thing. And in addition, they're fed and and housed rather well for the majority of the year, if not the entire year, from the standpoint of receiving meals. I know that they're housed for the entire year.
And I'll be honest, I'm not against some form of athlete pay, okay? But I will say this in all honesty, I've yet to see anyone put forth one that doesn't violate federal law, violate Title IX, violate state laws, and create total catastrophe. So conceptually, I'm for it, but the devil's in the details, and I've yet to see anyone who has actually put together a plan that can check off all of those things on there and say, yep, we covered all of our bases. It doesn't exist. I think what happens, there's an interesting conversation going forward now is the talk of, could the players unionize, form one group? And in my lack of sleep, I did a lot of reading and research, and it turns out that they're going to have a really hard time unionizing, because the National Labor Relations Board Act of, I think it was 1935, maybe 36, someone will check me on that, but it says you can unionize except in states where it is against the law for public employees to unionize. So you now look at about half of the states in this country that don't allow unionization of public employees, and a good half of these schools are public institutions. So if we want to take the leap and say, all right, they're employees, they're not, but let's just for the sake of argument say they are, there are half of the states that won't allow them to unionize anyway. Could they form some other amalgamation, group formation, and not call it a union and do other things? Sure. And that's 2, 3, 4, 5 years down the road. That's not in anyone's immediate future. People, and when they talk about it, people bring up Northwestern. You remember that? What was it? I don't even remember, 3, 4 years ago, whatever it was. Northwestern, what those players weren't even talking about money. They wanted extended health care, and they wanted scholarship guarantees if they had to quit due to physical injury. That's what they wanted. And they went through the process, and they were they voted to unionize. And the part that people forget about the ultimate ruling from the NLRB, because it was this big of a piece, in the ultimate ruling was, okay, let's say you do unionize. Fine. You are now employees of the university. Your scholarships are now taxable income. Whoa, hang on here. Hang on here. You got 18, 19-year-old kids who are making nothing, and their scholarship has no monetary value directly to them. They got to pay taxes on it. Okay, that's not going to work so well. And the whole thing crumbled under the weight of the idea. But fast forward, and what did they get out of it? Almost every Power 5 school guarantees your scholarship, even if you have to medically retire. And there is extended health care in most schools for anywhere from 3 to 4 years after you've left the school. If you suffered injury or have some medical issue that was caused by your playing time at that school, they cover you for another several years after that. So ultimately, they shamed the Power 5 conferences into doing what they had wanted to begin with.
Tony, if the people that follow your work, and those people being college football fans, are the same as the people that follow my work,
sure,
they don't always want to know the hows and the whys. So I will explain as best I know the hows and the whys. They want to know what the conclusion is. Are we going to play football? When are we going to play football? So sure, what would be your best guess estimate on that right now? As
you and I sit here and record this, my best guess is the Big Ten and Pac-12, no. The ACC, the SEC, yes. The Big 12, 60-40, yes. And I think what gets interesting, because I agree with you, the watching the sausages get made can be a pretty ugly experience. It takes away from the purity that we all like to think exists in college football. The interesting thing is we are hearing, as of a couple hours ago, that some of the schools in the Big Ten, because right now it looks like it's a 12-2 vote to shut it down, but we're hearing, well, hang on a second. If we can go join an SEC or ACC schedule for a year, why not? Let's go do that instead. So maybe Nebraska does that. Hey, Nebraska, in the midst of all the chaos of the Big Ten is shut down, Nebraska was out practicing today. We had somebody out there who saw it. They were out practicing today. So look, maybe would the SEC say, hey, Nebraska, come on down here for 1 year. We're not going to give you a full piece of the pie, the same as Mississippi State or Tennessee or anyone else gets, but we're going to give you a little piece of the revenue pie, which helps you compared to the big nothing you're about to get. And again, then it goes to the questions of, does the school want to pay for the protocol, the testing protocols and the insurance and the hundreds of thousands of dollars per month that winds up costing. There's a cost analysis that has to go with it. But I think you see the SEC and the ACC working with ESPN to try and come up with something.
Now, if you're just talking about dollars and cents and how much money has been made in the past versus what is being risked this year and not playing, it would surprise some people on the surface. Again, you gave us a deeper explanation of possibly why that the Big Ten made more money than any conference in college football last year.
Sure.
So that would seem to be opposed to the situation or the decision that was made.
You would think so, but think about it. In the 2019-2020 financial reports are not completely available. So the best we can do and what we dug up was 2018-19. And Ohio State operated at a $10 million deficit that year for the athletic department. Did they climb out of it last year? We haven't seen the reporting yet, but we'll say yes, just for the sake of argument. That puts them at pretty much even. That same year, Alabama was at a $20 million deficit. Maybe stop giving Steve Sarkisian pay raises would be one solution for that. But you get my point. It is never as financially rosy as what you think it is when you look at the astronomical expenses. Maybe Clemson doesn't need a water slide or whatever that thing is, in the players' lounge. I think one of the things that got a lack of attention, even out here on the West Coast, where it should have been banner headlines, is Stanford. Stanford, who has about half of its non-revenue sports covered by private endowment money, cut 11 programs last month. Just done. And to me, and I was telling people that should set off alarms for everybody, for all of college athletics. A university that is as well funded and as prestigious as Stanford is like, you know what? These 11 are gone now before we even hit the worst case scenario with pandemic losses and college football losses. These 11 are already gone. Last Friday night, Stanford, the university as a whole, not the athletic department, laid off 300 people and cut 100 jobs permanently. I talked to someone I know in the trustee realm at Stanford, and they were like, I know it sounds weird. We're doing it proactively instead of reactively because financially we see this impacting colleges, not for the next 6 months or 9 months, but for the next 2 to 3 years. And it's going to be a long battle to climb out of it financially, especially if you're not playing sports, especially if there's not going to be football or TV revenue or whatever the case may be. And I think you look at it, and these schools relied on that TV revenue so long and so heavily. It was like a drug. You get more, and you build a water slide, and you build state-of-the-art locker rooms, and things like that, without really distributing the money across the board. So you've got some safety nets in place. It was, let's throw it at the next biggest, brightest thing, that we can build because, hey, the recruits like it and it looks good on TV and all of those things. And now you see some financial comeuppance for some of these schools. And that's why I think some of them are going to try and play.
I think I have my answer to my next question because there's just too much on the line to deal with currently. But do you think there's any forward thought to being on the right or the wrong side of history? So there are going to be schools and conferences that decide not to play, as has already basically been determined. And we believe that others will determine to play. Maybe the entire thing gets shut down. We'll see. But there's going to be a review of this situation by College Football Nation 3 and 5 years from now to say they were right, they were wrong. And those two sides may have had very good data, made very sound, wise decisions, but you don't always know how it's going to play out. Of course, to know whether you made the right decision
Right.
in terms of what the conclusion was. You can make a good decision and have it turn out terribly wrong, and you can get a little bit lucky and things work out for you.
Right.
Any thought in regards to, being on the right side of history?
Yeah, I think if they wanted to be I think if they worked at being on the right side of history, whatever that side winds up being, they should have had, and I'm speaking of the college football universe, the planning should have started 4 months ago, 5 months ago. We talked to coaches who were like, yeah, we don't have a lot of faith that there's really going to be a full season, run on time, run like usual. We got to have backup plans. I think you and I talked once before jokingly. Herm Edwards told me you have to have a plan, and that plan has to have a backup plan, and the backup plan has to have a backup plan, or you're just kidding yourself. You're not really doing anything. I think that the ideas and the thoughts and the plans kicked in too late. I think that, I had an offline conversation with someone who was on the pandemic response team of the previous presidential administration. And I wouldn't want to throw that person's name out there because I don't think I have the permission to do that. But the point was, this is doable if you plan the right way. You have to accept the fact that there are going to be positive cases, not just on the football team, but on the campus as a whole, unless you shut down every campus, which you cannot do. There is required in-person learning for a lot of majors, a lot of classes. You can't take your science lab sitting on the couch at home. You can't take your forensics or your archaeology or any medical sitting on the couch at home. There is a requirement. There's got to be some in-person learning at pretty much every school. You phase it in. You phase in how the players come in. Look what Notre Dame did. Look what USC did. Look at what Texas Tech did. Oklahoma, very few positive cases. Even UCLA, right? Because they started with an idea of, first, we're going to bring in players from a 50-mile radius because the contact tracing is easier to do that way. And then we phase them in little by little instead of waiting like LSU did. We're going to get them all on campus, and 2 or 3 days in, we'll start our testing. Well, a bunch of them brought the virus with them when they were out clubbing before they showed up for strength and conditioning camp. So there was a way to do it. And she said it's about isolation when they get positive tests. It's about containment, and it's about risk minimization. How far can we go before it's out of control? And there are ways to do it if you plan smartly. It feels like, and I'm sure that any school president or AD would say, oh, no, we've been thinking about this since February. The proof says otherwise. Where we are right now says you really didn't start putting these things into motion until a month ago, when it was really too late to save the entire season.
Or it could be similar to a lot of meetings that you and I have probably been privy to and been part of during our various career stops that, yeah, they thought about it. They had a conversation. They had a meeting. Nothing was decided at the meeting except to hold another meeting in 2 weeks. And
Right.
It kept getting pushed down the road, and thoughts and theories, but never really any action taken to
Sure.
put a plan in place.
Sure. Hey, look, and these videos that have run for the past 3-4 weeks with the SEC coaches, wear a mask, save the season, really cute. Would have been better 4 months ago if you started running those, would have seemed like, look, if you tell college football fans 4 months ago, if everybody wears a mask, we can have at least most of the season, man, they would have been masked up like crazy because they would have said, I am saving college football. Forget I'm saving my health or your health. I'm saving college football. That is more meaningful.
That would have been the sales point other than, yeah. And
Right.
you just came up with the slogan right there.
There you
Save
go.
college football. I'm saving college football.
Right. But you needed to start that 4 or 5 months ago. And so to me, it's those kinds of things that show the lack of planning that went into this. And it puts us where we are now, which is in hour by hour limbo.
Tony Siracusa, last word on college football. Please check him out and the rest of the staff there. This is why we have Tony on, to break down the complex scenarios.
I appreciate that. I do what I can.
Tony, we appreciate you stopping by. Stay safe, stay healthy, and we will, I don't know if fingers crossed works at this point. I think we've passed a certain point
Right.
And maybe we'll all be ACC and SEC fans this season.
I'm all on board, man. Whatever school wants to make me the best offer for rooting intentions, I'm there.
Nobody has as pretty uniforms as those UCLA Blues, though, so you're not going to be able to latch on to a team that comes anywhere close to that standard.
That's true, but I can be convinced with other things.
We'll see you, Tony. Thanks so much.
All right, Mark.